Welcome to From the Magic Pencil, Voices of Writing Through. Our goal is to amplify the voices of people whose stories need to be heard. Welcome to another episode of From the Magic Pencil, Voices of Writing Through. And today I'm very excited to be able to introduce to everybody Martha Scarborough. Martha Scarborough was one of the earliest volunteers, if not the first volunteer, actually, of Writing Through, and now a good friend. And she's got lots of interesting experiences that would be great to share. So hi, Martha. How are you?
Hi, I'm good.
Thank you for doing this and welcome. Maybe you could first just give a little bit of background about how you got involved in Writing Through and what you did.
Well, I think that I saw something on the Singapore Expat Wives Facebook page about it. There was a post and I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. So I went to the first facilitator training, and you were going to send us off into space in Cambodia by ourselves, which sounded a little more than I was willing to bite off at once. So I said, well, how about if I come with you and watch one? And so that's what we did. And you were like, somebody would actually come and pay to fly to Cambodia and stay just to watch? And so, but that has become the model. And I was very glad I did it that way. We had a great time and I was very inspired. I think that was the circus, Far Circus.
Far Circus.
Yeah. That was such a blast to start with that one, because those folks were so creative and amazing.
That's great. Well, the whole thing started so organically that, I didn't know what I was doing. I was just doing something, and I went on the assumption, which I kind of still assume, that anything that I can do, anybody else can do. Mm-hmm. And you were the one who said, no, Sue, not necessarily everything that is in your head will automatically be in somebody else's head too. That's when we started the idea of the shadow as part of training. So thank you for that.
It's nice to have company when you're doing something.
It is. That's absolutely true. And I remember sitting in the back of a tuk-tuk coming from one of the sessions talking to you, and you were the one who said, yeah, people will want to do this.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in your experience as an expat, because I was an expat as well. I lived in London for 26 years, but I only lived in one country. It's a whole different thing, I would think, when you are somebody who devotes such a big part of your life to living in different cultures.
We didn't plan it that way. We thought we'd be gone for a couple of years. So we started in Moscow and thinking this will be a couple of years. And then we went on to Bucharest and then Singapore for 9 years, which I think we just stayed for so long because there's no seasons and we lost track of time. And it was a great base to travel from. That was the great thing about Singapore. And then we did one last one in Japan, which was just wonderful, glorious.
So having access and an opportunity to really immerse yourself in these very, very different cultures, it's hard to compare. I don't want to ask you to compare them, but are there any similarities that you see when you look back on it, especially maybe vis-a-vis your experience with Writing Through? I mean, the education systems, I guess, must be very different, or their language development.
I mean, first of all, I have to say, because my husband worked at international schools, we weren't really truly immersed in the local culture. We were definitely in the expat bubble. Singapore was easier because it's an English-speaking island. Everybody has other languages, but English is the common language. I could do more things outside of the expat experience. But I will say that Singapore, not the international schools, but the Singapore school system and general thinking system, like Cambodia, tends to be very concrete and not creativity based. While I was there, I got my master's in counseling. So I was also doing some counseling where you do get a strong sense of what people's life experience has been. So that helped me, I think, with Writing Through, because I understood where people were coming from in terms of not prioritizing individual expression the way it is in the West. Mm-hmm. They prioritize the group experience, and this is certainly true in Japan too, group harmony. Although Singapore is extremely materialistic and achievement oriented.
What about Russia?
Well, I don't know anything about it. The only thing I know about the Russian school systems, When we were in Russia, which was the early 2000s, we were actually at a Jewish gathering. I can't remember whether it was Rosh Hashanah or something. And there were a lot of folks who had left when Jews were allowed to leave, emigrated to the US, and had now come back for business reasons because they spoke Russian. And this guy told us a story about how he had left when he was in high school and ended up in high school in America. And in Russia, the grades are all given in the Soviet days to the class. There were no individual grades.
Oh, fascinating.
So everybody cheated. I mean, it wasn't even considered cheating. So when he got to high school in America and he was looking at his friend's paper, he got into trouble. And, you know, it was really and that was early days for me as an expat, where you really have one of those aha moments where you realize, wow, things are just different in different parts of the world. The rules are different. It's not better than, worse than. Everybody's just making their way the way that they're trained to.
Yeah. And I think even if you weren't involved with the local educational system, you see the products.
That's for sure.
You know, you
Yeah.
see the people who have grown up in that system as functioning adults. I know that when we do writing through workshops with adults in Cambodia and in Singapore, actually, it's always harder. They're much more reticent about opening up and about just being free with their thinking. It can be more stuck. It takes a little bit more work to open them up.
When I was getting my master's in counseling, in all of our classes, there were a few expats and mostly Singaporeans. And the teachers were from Australia. They would come over and teach for several days every month, and we would then do our work, and then they would come back. And it was always the expats who would raise their hands. The teachers were teaching sort of Western style. They would ask an open-ended question, especially with counseling, like, you know, what would you do in this situation? And the Singaporeans would never raise their hands. So I was at lunch with some Singaporean colleagues one day, and I said, how come you folks don't raise your hands? Because it was embarrassing. I was caught between, you know, I was the age or older than a lot of the teachers, and I didn't like leaving them hanging out there with nobody answering, but I didn't want to be the ugly Westerner who takes up too much space. So I said, how come you guys don't raise your hands? And she said, well, we don't know the answer. The teacher knows the answer. Why would we want to waste everybody's time?
Right.
So I
That's
feel
fascinating.
That really speaks to the writing through mission, because it's that moment where you don't know, you don't know, but you're willing to, you know, take a moment and think, well, what might come out here? And not worry about whether it's right or wrong, and not assume that the authority figure knows the right answer. Working something through your own creative process.
Yeah. And giving yourself permission to make a mistake.
Right.
Or what you think is a mistake, which is, of course, one of our quote unquote rules. You know, the first rule is that there's no such thing as a mistake. If you really thought something through and you have an idea, say it. Get that editor off of your shoulder. And that's very, very hard for adults, which is another reason why I love being able to give the running through workshops to adults. A lot of times people think it's for students, and it's not. And some of the kind of effects that the writing through workshops have on adults is just amazing and life-changing in some ways. You had an experience with a group, one of the first groups that you taught in Singapore.
This is an organization called Home, which takes in and provides shelter and legal assistance and different kinds of workshops to what are called helpers in Singapore, who live in, they're not Singaporean, they tend to be from the Philippines, Myanmar, Indonesia, India, and sometimes they're really mistreated. They're not allowed to go out. They have their passports confiscated, their phones confiscated. So sometimes they escape. They have to escape. Sometimes there's abuse, sexual and otherwise. So they escape, and this organization gives them support of various kinds. So we went in there, and especially with the Filipino women, they do speak English, you know, perfectly well. Some of them are quite highly educated in the Philippines, but they have no economic prospects. So all over the world, there are Filipinos working and sending money back to their families. These women, they live together, they work together, they clean together, they wait for their trials to, I mean, they really have support each other.
It's amazing. Home was one of our first Singapore partners, and it's really harrowing to see the experience of some of these women, and really a gift that we can have a chance to help them in some way.
I think of all the workshops, all the places that we've done workshops, as I was reading through things, the magazines earlier today, a lot of funny stories. So I would say, actually, having been involved with them, harrowing was not the takeaway. The
Interesting.
takeaway was mutual support, good humor, resilience, and warmth.
Wow, that's great. That's fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, that's true for me, I would say, at all, and no matter where I've done workshops. The takeaway for me is how amazing these folks are. So this is a story that I didn't find out till later, was by a woman who had actually been an English teacher in the Philippines, but was now cleaning houses and doing childcare in order to send money back to her family. She was one that it was hard for me to leave behind. You know, there are some people you just want to do more for, and you really think they're but for fate go I, you know?
Yeah.
So this story is called When the Light is Dying. On a sunny and crisp Friday morning in September, 14 years ago, a small and simple family in a mountainous village somewhere in the Philippines had to face a very heartbreaking moment that would change their lives forever. Anna was awakened by the chirping of birds outside her window. As she got up, she could feel the warm kiss of the sun on her face, which came in from the tiny cracks in the wall made of bamboo. She folded her old and worn blanket carefully, without making any noise, so that she would not disturb the little angels sleeping beside her. She carefully went into the kitchen to boil some water. Another wonderful day has come, she murmured to herself. It had been a month, and she was counting, marking the days on the calendar, and crying to herself, another day has passed. Their house was made from bamboo and nipa palm leaves, a typical house of a family who belonged to the lower class. They lacked material things. They did not have the comforts that some families had in their village. Her husband was a farmer. They owned a small piece of land where bananas were planted, and a sickly and frail carabao that barely helped in the field because it was already too old. At the back of the house was a small garden where different vegetables were planted. They never had a ball of cheese on their table during the Christmas days. They never had cakes with candles to blow out during her children's birthday parties. They did not have fancy clothes. They did not have appliances. But above all, she could say that her life with her husband and children was like a life on a bed of roses. Her children were the apple of her eyes. She could not stand a minute without seeing their angelic faces. Her children were her treasures. She loved her family. She did not want to hurt them. Life with them was definitely a heaven on earth. Another day had come, but this time, instead of the happy chirping of birds, she heard another sound. She could see many people. She could see her children. She could see the tears flowing down their cheeks. She wanted to hug them. She wanted to comfort them and tell them everything is going to be all right. She slowly moved towards their places, but she could not touch them. She could not hug them. Anna was screaming, "I'm here," but nobody seemed to listen to her. Only then she realized that her children were crying because of her. Only then she realized that the lady lying on the bed, lifeless, was nobody but her. 10 years later, the children grew up to be successful people. The eldest is Michelle, now a teacher. Michael, the youngest, is now a soldier. And the very supportive and strong father never married again because nobody could ever replace Anna in his heart forever. The storm had passed. Anna's husband, Mike, and his children were able to surpass the trial that God had given them. Mike knew that wherever Anna is, she is happy to see them. She is happy because after the storm, a very beautiful rainbow appeared, telling them that life must go on, even without her beside them forever.
Wow. 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 Yeah.
Everybody was crying. I mean, this woman had stories inside her.
No.
She's a writer.
Right. And, so many people that we work with grow up in cultures where writing is not something that you do. Like in Cambodia, reading isn't something that you do. That's just starting to change now.
Mm.
But the idea of thinking through what you want to say and finding the most beautiful words you can find, taking the time with language so that you can really convey what is deepest in your heart, that doesn't happen over there.
Well, and I have to say, I was shocked when my son was in high school. There was no creative writing. This was
No.
one of the best international schools in the world. It's all analytical writing and persuasive writing and critical writing and, useful writing.
Right.
It's
And of
not,
course, what we understand is that the way that you develop those critical thinking skills is through writing and creative writing. That's what unlocks all of that
yeah.
when you don't expect it. I'm not sure what culture of reading and writing is like in the Philippines. I think it's certainly stronger. Certainly reading is stronger than in some place like Cambodia. I'm not sure about writing, but clearly this is a woman. You said she was an English teacher. It's also the structure of the story is interesting. It flows in a pretty sophisticated way,
Right.
considering that she probably wrote it in what, a half hour or 45 minutes?
Right.
Yeah, that's quite something. Well, thank you for sharing that with us.
Sure.
It's really inspiring. In next week's episode, I continue to chat with Martha, where we discuss her move back to the States and her interest in running workshops with the elderly. We also talk about why she considers the magazine to be so important and how her dance background has helped her teach our participants the best way to present their work. She also will share another piece by one of the participants from the home workshop. And remember, if you're interested in volunteering with us or getting in touch with us at all, you can contact us easily through our website, www.writingthrough.org. Here's a taster of what's to come.
There's so many levels of connection. There's the connection of, one's own interior to bringing that out. There's the connection of, the mind and the heart, and then the body when you're presenting.
If you are enjoying this podcast, we'd be so grateful if you could subscribe and take a moment to rate and review it. Also, please be sure to recommend it to anyone in your life who you think might enjoy it. We need your help to spread the word. There are so many more exciting episodes to come. Thanks so much. See you next week. From the Magic Pencil is a collaborative product of the staff and volunteers of Writing Through, including founder and executive director Sue Guiney and deputy director Kristen Schuster. It is edited and produced by our operations coordinator, B. Rice. We would like to give special thanks to our interns, Rachel Walkman and Eva Phelps, without whom these podcasts would not have been possible. If you are interested in donating, volunteering, or partnering with Writing Through, or just finding out a little bit more about what we do, you can check out our website at www.writingthrough.org. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn, or email us at info@writingthrough.org. Until next time, thank you so much for listening. Ever onward.